This tiny lens that comes in at an affordable price point of just $350 honestly shouldn't be as interesting as it is. And that's exactly why it's so underrated. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Max, and today I want to talk about the Sony 10 to 18mm f4 with optical steady shot and why you should check it out if you haven't yet. It's an older APS-C ultra-wide lens from 2012. It was initially designed for Sony E-mount crop sensor cameras, and yet I keep using it on a full-frame Sony A7 IV anyway. On paper that sounds like compromise stacked on compromise. APS-C lens on full-frame, visible vignetting, older optics, f4, softer corners. Why when there are newer and better lenses out there? Simply because there are too many things way too great about it. I recently went on a trip to Hamburg in northern Germany. Let me show you what this lens can capture. If you strip everything back and just look at the hard facts, it's a Sony E-mount lens designed for APS-C cameras, which have a smaller sensor than full-frame cameras. The cool thing is that you can use it on full-frame cameras where it becomes even wider. The aperture is constant f4 across the entire zoom range, which means you don't get that brightness shift as you zoom in or out. And minimum aperture goes down to f22. Autofocus is supported and you also get optical steady shot, OSS in short. That's Sony in-lens stabilization, and for a lens this wide, especially in handheld or video use, that actually matters more than people think. Minimum focus distance is 0.25 meters, so it's not a macro lens, but you can still get reasonably close for dramatic wide-angle perspective shots. Now physically, this is where the lens starts to stand out in real-world use. It weighs just 225 grams, and for an ultra-wide zoom lens, that's extremely light. You feel it immediately. It's the kind of lens that you can keep on your camera all day long without thinking about it. And that means easier handheld shooting, longer vlogging, sessions without fatigue, and just less hesitation to actually bring your camera with you. Size is 70mm diameter and 63.5mm in length. So it's compact, travel friendly and easy to pack or leave mounted in a bag without becoming a burden. It also uses a 62mm filter thread, and that's a small but very practical detail because it means standard ND filters, polarizers and screw-on filters all work without needing bulky step-up rings or adapters. For video shooters especially, that keep things simple. Price-wise, this is where things get positively interesting because at launch it's set around 850 USD. And in today's market, if you can even find it new, it still hovers around that price range. But if you buy it used, it's a completely different story. Suddenly you're looking at $350 instead, which can be much more affordable. And to be honest, this price gap is important because it completely changes how you evaluate this lens. At the full retail price, it competes with much newer ultra-wide lenses that are sharper and more modern. But as used prices, it becomes a genuinely strong, valuable choice for travel, vlogging, or even everyday content creation. The first thing that matters here is a simple correction that's easy to miss. The 10 to 80mm refers to the actual physical focal length of the lens. And that number never changes. It's always 10 to 80mm no matter what camera you use. What changes is the field of view, meaning how wide the scene looks in your final image. Because APS-C sensors are smaller, they crop into the image slightly compared to full-frame cameras. As a result, this 10 to 80mm lens on an APS-C camera gives you a field of view that looks similar to a 15 to 27mm lens on a full-frame camera. And that's ideal for vlogging or filming conversations because most people prefer something around 60mm for keeping the camera at arm's length while filming environmental context. And 24mm is loved by many for talking headshots like this. In other words, you're still using an ultra-wide lens, but a smaller sensor makes it appear a bit narrower than the 10 to 80mm number might suggest. But now the interesting part starts when you move it onto a full-frame body like the Sony A7 IV, because technically you can mount it and shoot at 10mm in full-frame mode. But what you get isn't a clear ultra-wide image, but strong vignetting. The lens wasn't designed to cover full-frame sensor, so the image circle doesn't fully reach the edges. That means dark corners, a visible fall-off, and some edge softness, especially at the widest end. But here's where it gets more interesting than just this is a limitation. That vignette doesn't have to be a problem. In fact, you can treat it as a part of its very unique look. Instead of adding artificial vignette in post, you can already have a natural one baked in. Depending on how you shoot it, it can feel more organic, more imperfect in a way that something actually helps the image feel less clinical. I would say it gives your footage character. And Sony's crop tools are a great addition to that. On a camera like the Sony A7 IV, you can effectively combine how you use this lens. At 10mm, you're in full frame mode with that wide vignette, slightly stylized ultra-wide look. Then as you move towards the 8mm, you get a vignette-free clean optic. And to take it one step further, you can even switch into an APS-C crop behavior, which gives you roughly a 27mm equivalent field of view without losing much detail. What that means in practice is that your usable range stretches from extreme wide at 10mm all the way to a more natural 27mm equivalent framing on a full frame camera. And this way you're basically set for every scenario you want to capture when it comes to everyday use. Most often ultra-wide focal length just make life easier as a creator or casual videographer or photographer. At these widths, framing becomes almost forgiving. You can just point your camera at something and you can be almost certain that you captured something usable. It's not just about being wide, it's about reducing friction between I want to film this and actually pressing record without overthinking, overspending, or being nervous holding a big setup in public. Compared to larger, more intimidating lenses, this one is actually discreet. It doesn't draw attention. It doesn't feel intrusive. In crowded places, in travel environments, or in situations where people are sensitive to cameras, that matters. You blend in more easily, and that has a direct impact on output, because the more comfortable you feel with shooting, the more likely you are to actually capture moments in real situations instead of hesitating. Also good to keep in mind, the zoom is an extending barrel design. As you move toward 80mm, the lens physically extends outwards. That changes the balance of the camera slightly while zooming. But to be honest, modern gimbals can stabilize slight weight adjustments with ease, so don't worry about it. And of course, there's the elephant in the room. It's aperture limitation at f4. On the downside, it limits low light flexibility and reduces subject separation compared to faster lenses. You're not getting the shutter depth of field look that f1.4 or f2.8 lenses can give you, meaning the autofocus area isn't as strong as many prefer. But on the upside, it's constant across the entire zoom range, which keeps exposure predictable. And in ultra-wide shooting, landscape, travel, vlogging, that trade-off I feel like is acceptable. For those use cases, you're usually shooting for context, not isolation. And if you're outside with some sunlight, the f4 is no limitation at all, and you still get plenty of usable depth of field in my opinion. So depending on the use case for this lens, the trade-offs that come with it can either feel like a limitation or exactly the reason why you would still reach for it today. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. You can find a link to this lens and other gear I use in the description below. Some of them are affiliate links which supports the channel if you use them. I appreciate you watching until the very end, and I will catch you in the next one.